Hi everyone, my name is Heather. Welcome to my channel. I have been wanting to get a YouTube video going for over a year now so that I could tell you guys all about these lists that I make with my son where we read an illustrated chapter book from each decade starting from the 1900s to the present, as well as one from the 1800s. So I guess the thing to do on YouTube is to get cozy, get relaxed, grab a cup of coffee or tea, and I'm going to do so myself, and then I'll share these lists with you. All right, see you in a minute. All right, so I forgot to mention that it's going to come to about 13 books, by the way. So yeah, so there's quite a few that we have to cover here. So let me take a sip of coffee and let's get started. The first book that I want to share with you guys today from the 1800s is Pinocchio. So Pinocchio was written in 1881, I believe, as a series for a children's magazine, and then it was later republished in book format in 1883. It's by Carlo Collodi, and the version we chose was by Mina Lima. I really love this version. I almost didn't read Pinocchio to my son because I had read some reviews saying how dark it was, and I was worried it would be too much. But then I kept thinking, well, I mean, publishers just keep publishing these books, so many versions of Pinocchio, so there must be something to it, right? So I decided to get Pinocchio and to read it to him. And we loved it. He loved it. I loved it. It's one of those books where we both loved it so much. There's great value in this story, amazing value, because it teaches not to just trust everybody, not to just trust everything, to think about situations and to listen to your inner voice. It's such a wonderful book to read. If you haven't seen the Disney version of Pinocchio, some of the dark things won't actually be that dark. So everyone knows the story of Pinocchio, but just in case, Mr. Antonio gets this piece of wood, and the wood, speaks to him one day and it freaks him out. So he goes ahead and fobs it off on Geppetto and says, here, you can have this piece of wood. So Geppetto goes with it, and he actually carves a puppet out of it. And this puppet gets sent off to school. He's, basically, I think he's like a day or so old. And of course, being only a day old and instantly school age, he makes a ton of mistakes and trusts the wrong people. And it's just a series of events where he's just making bad decisions, but somehow everything turns right in the end, and he ends up learning lessons and becoming the courageous puppet that we all know, where he becomes a real boy. So yeah, and it's a heartwarming tale, and the writing is easy. It's very easy to read. There are two things I wanted to tell you. First of all, when you're reading a translated work, translations allow for modernization at the same time. So if you're reading a recent translation, it'll be more modern for the modern child. So that makes it quite easy to read. Also, the chapters are rather short, so that's great. You can just read a small amount at one time. The other thing I wanted to say about Pinocchio is, because there is that possible dark element to it, it's one of those books that's really great if you choose the right illustrated version. We chose this one. There are so many. I run a website, or a blog website, that explores the illustrators of classics. So like, let's say I'll choose a classic like I did Pinocchio. It was actually the first one I ever did. I'll go and I'll collect as many of the illustrated versions as I can find. I'll take pictures of them and I'll post them all on my website. So if you are interested in Pinocchio, go ahead and head over there. I'll leave a link below, and I'll also leave a link to the Mina Lima version if you're interested in this one. But I went with this one because it sort of lightens all those dark tones to the story. It's just so bright and colorful and fun. Look at this guy. Okay, so he's the fire eater, right? I don't know if you can see that, but yeah, he's the fire eater, but he's actually the nicest man in the end. I kind of felt bad that I took him for granted, and then there's Pinocchio with his nose growing. But yeah, just a fun, light version that I think keeps kids interested. It's really a great story. That said, I will say there was one part that my son found quite scary. That was the donkey ears, the kids when they're getting their donkey ears. But I mean, who hasn't been scared by that part? If you watch the Disney film, you know what I'm talking about. So anyway, so that's Pinocchio. So now we are in the 1900 to 1910 decade. And the book I have for you is The Tales of Beatrix Potter. And I know this is like the hugest book ever. I actually found this at a garage sale and snatched it up, and I know it's exactly the opposite of what Beatrix Potter's books actually look like when they first came out. They were tiny, like this one. I picked up this little Tale of the Flopsy Bunnies when I was visiting Beatrix Potter's Hilltop Farm, by the way, in the UK last autumn. I just love this version so much. It shows off her illustrations so beautifully, all in one spot. And they're just, I mean, you really can't beat Beatrix Potter's illustrations. And my son actually started liking them more the older he got. Like when he was younger, he was actually a bit afraid of some of the tales. But the older he became, he started really getting into them. He has some that he loves more than others. I think his favorites are the Flopsy Bunnies and Benjamin Bunny and Jemima Puddle Duck. Beatrix Potter has such an awesome way of telling a tale. And just a treasure. 1910 to 1920, and the book I have for you is The Adventures of Maya the Bee. Now, it is not the prettiest version. It's a bit vintage, and the reason is because I have not been able to really find a great modern version of Maya the Bee in English. I found some in Spanish and I think in German. Of course, that's the original language it was published in, written by Valdemar Bonsals, and this version was illustrated by Vera Brock, and it just has some really pretty illustrations that I thought worked well. There's always these little chapter headings. I hope you can see that okay. And then there is some of these dual tone full page illustrations that I just thought were so lovely. This version is really precious to me. I think it's wonderful, although I would be so happy if they would republish this book. So Maya the bee is born into the hive, and she just wants more than the hive life, and she takes off and she explores the world. Really, it's just an amazing adventure where you dive into the world of a bee and see the world through a bee's eyes. I just remember this one scene where you're taking in all the sounds and the smells. They have an enemy in the wasps, but we find at the end that one of the wasps is not so much of an enemy. It's just heartwarming, beautiful tale. I highly recommend it, even though you probably will have to look for a vintage copy. 1920s, and the book I have for you is The Story of Dr. Doolittle by Hugh Lofting. The version that I chose by Angel Dominguez, it's just beautiful. Dr. Doolittle, he can chat with animals, he understands them, and he gets called to Africa to help with a monkey epidemic. The one thing that you should know about Dr. Doolittle is it's kind of one of those books where there's some really big time outdated cultural issues with it. It's not just one or two sentences which you can skip over. It's a whole chapter, and the original illustrations are just, very outdated. You probably don't want to read the version with the original illustrations. So with this version, as well as the Michael Haig, what they did was they just took out the offensive material and changed it a little bit to suit modern children. But minimize it. They didn't touch anything that didn't need to be touched. And those are the versions that I read. And so both of these versions, this one as well as the Michael Haig version, are great. I find the value in this story is that it gives the perspective of animals, and also it's just a fun story to read, and it's funny sometimes, and it's just, it's adventurous, and it's kind of neat to, as a child, to imagine being able to speak to animals. I think that would be so fascinating as a child. So this is another one of these books where I loved it as well as my son loved it. And I highly recommend it. Let me show you an illustration or two. So there's one of them. There's the Push Me Pull You. So now we are into the 1930s, and the book I have for you is Mary Poppins. Mary Poppins was written in 1934 by P.L. Travers, and the version that I have here is illustrated by Mary Shepard, who you would know through Ernest Shepard, who is the illustrator of Winnie the Pooh. Ernest Shepard is her father. And they're just delightful illustrations. Here's Mary Poppins coming up the lane. However, we didn't read this version. I actually chose another version to read, and that was this one. illustrated by Julius Sarda. And I enjoyed this so much. I love the Disney film as well. It's beautiful. And there were some parts of the film that I thought were better, and there were some parts of the book that I thought were better. For example, in the film, that scene where Mary Poppins and Bert and the children go through the sidewalk and they go to that land that's animated with the merry-go-round and all that. In the book, it's only Mary Poppins and Bert, so she doesn't take the children with her. I was kind of disappointed about that from the book, but that is about it. The rest of the book is just wonderful. Mary Poppins comes to Cherry Tree Lane to be the nanny for 4 children. It's the 2 eldest, but there's also twins that are infants. Basically takes them in hand and they go on adventures all over the place, and I really enjoyed it because there were so many extra chapters that I just thought were so beautiful. Like there's this one chapter where they hang gingerbread stars up at night, and I just thought that was like the most beautiful scene, with a ladder and hanging up the stars in the sky, but they're actually gingerbread cookies, or they were gingerbread cookies, or magical gingerbread cookies. There's other chapters that have a lot of the fairy tale elements in them, and they kind of got left out of the movie, so I would definitely recommend reading the book because it's just a joy. And I've read this now twice, once with my son and once just to myself, and I really enjoyed it both times. Some illustration from the Mary Poppins by Julius Sarda. I loved all the birds there. And let me find another. Here's them floating up. I thought that was such a cool scene. I just want to show you a couple other versions I have because I did an Illustrator Explorer on Mary Poppins. So I have a couple of illustrators here. So I have this paperback as well, which actually has the Mary Shepherd illustrations inside. Oh, incidentally, like the story of Dr. Doolittle, P.L. Travers also unfortunately did a chapter that was a bit culturally outdated, but fortunately in her lifetime she realized that it needed to change, so she updated the version, which I feel I'm so happy that she herself revised it because it's still her genuine writing even though it's revised. And the other version I have for you is this one by Lauren Child. I love her artwork. She's such a great artist. She takes materials and she creates her illustrations using those materials. The Mary Poppins book has 12 chapters and Lauren Child only 7 of them. And in the foreword, she writes, "The 7 chapters I chose to illustrate and include in this collection were the ones I found particularly thought-provoking and joyful, although all of them are extraordinarily imaginative simply because Travers had the most incredible mind." So, yeah, only 7 of the chapters are in this beautiful version, but it is gorgeous. Now we're in the 1940s, and written in 1941 is The Black Stallion. This was written by Walter Farley, and the version I have here was illustrated by Dominique de Andrea. But there is also a really nice version by Keith Ward, which I think he was the original illustrator. But this is the one I had on hand, so I chose it, and I really love these illustrations. This is probably one of the top books on this list for me, and this is a list with a lot of books that I just really, really liked. But this one, both my son and I just adored it. You know, the Disney Cars universe with Lightning McQueen and Doc Hudson. The cool thing is that I would not be surprised if they got the idea for their story from the Black Stallion because there are so many elements in common. Alec Ramsey is on a ship headed back home to New York, and on the ship is this Black Stallion who's tied up, he's been mistreated, he's angry, he doesn't want anyone near him. The ship has a wreck. Alec unties the Black Stallion and ties his lead to him, and the Black Stallion drags him on shore. It's super exciting. And then eventually they learn to trust each other. Alec learns to ride him. Along comes the ship and finds them, takes them home. He takes the Black Stallion with him. And that's where the story kind of takes off and things really begin. And that's where it also starts to be what I say might have influenced this movie of Cars. It's a great book to read in the spring, too, if you're into the Kentucky Derby or any of the other horse racing. It's surprisingly a great book to read with your mom. We read it around Mother's Day, and it was such a nice surprise because there's a relationship between Alec and his mom in here that's just adorable. Let me show you some of the illustrations here to give you a sense of the style. There's where they actually found them, trying to get them on the ship so they can take them home. That's when they're on the island. But yeah, it's just such a wonderful read, and it's easy for modern kids, I think, to read. I highly recommend this one. It's a beautiful book. Now we are in the 1950s, and the 1950s is that category where there is just so many books to choose from. So the 1950s category I have for you, 101 Dalmatians. So this was also one of these books that just really charmed me, and nobody really talks about it. But it is a great book to read around Christmas time. It's set during the winter, and one of the final scenes that's really adorable happens on Christmas Eve. And Pongo and Mrs., that's the actual name of his lady dog, they lose their puppies. Cruella de Vil kidnaps them, and they have to go on a mission to find their puppies and bring them home. And on the way, they end up having more puppies than they bargained for. One of the things that's great to have with this book, and when you're talking about illustrated versions, is you really want to have an illustrated version that has the twilight barking. The twilight barking is that scene, you know, if you've watched the Disney film, they have it as well, where Pongo and Purdy, which is her name in the Disney film, they go and they bark, and then one bark goes from one dog to the next, and so on and so forth, until they finally get some word of where to head to find their puppies. Well, in the book, it's illustrated as well, and this version is by David Roberts, and he has put a beautiful little twilight barking where you start with Purdy and Mrs., and then the kids can kind of decide where they want it to go, and they can trace it from dog to dog. And I think it's just really fun for kids. I mean, my son had a great time with this. David Roberts, by the way, I don't know if you know the Questionnaire series. I have one of his books here. Unfortunately, I don't have the jacket. I think I found this one at a garage sale and snatched it up, but the Rosie Revere series, I love his illustrations because they're all sort of like Art Deco, super cool. But anyway, he's the one who illustrated this one. He also has the second book, the Starlight Barking. It's just separate. I don't have that with me, but this is a great version. Let me show you some other pictures. By the way, this is another one that I did an Illustrator Explore on my blog. So if you want to see more pictures of them, just visit my blog. Here's all the puppies. Some of them are in the dust, in the soot. So yeah, a really cute version. Another one that you might want to consider that I have also here is Alex T. Smith's version, which has the Starlight Barking included behind 101 Dalmatians. But I must just tell you that the only one that is illustrated is the first one, the 101 Dalmatians. The Starlight Barking doesn't have any illustrations. There's Cruella de Vil. So here is the Alex T. Smith's version of the Twilight Barking real quick, and it's different. It looks more like a travel brochure. And then the one that I actually read to my son was the Folio Society version, which comes in this really cute slipcase. It's so awesome. This was actually my very first Folio Society purchase, and I love it. It's illustrated by Sarah Ogilvy, and it has this lovely spine here. And here is her version of the Twilight Barking. So you start there and just go from where you want. And I just really adore her illustrations. I think they're beautiful. Some of them just really take my breath away. I couldn't have imagined a better illustrator, honestly. It's perfect. So I just wanted to read a little to you because I really love Dodie Smith's writing, and she just has such a lovely sort of tone about her writing. So I thought I would read it to you so you can sort of get a feel for the tone of the book. "There is something very mysterious about this barking at twilight," said Mrs. Dearly. "Do you think they are sending messages?" Mr. Dearly said it was a charming idea, but... And then he stopped. Was anything beyond dogs? Not when he thought of all Pongo and Mrs. had done. How had they got 97 pups back from Suffolk? Pongo and Mrs. longed to tell them, but they never could. Anyway, it's just so sweet. And yeah, like I said, I don't know why people don't talk about it more, but it's such a great Christmas read. So published in 1960 is A Cricket in Times Square by George Selden, and this is illustrated by the great Garth Williams. And this was another one of those really beautiful books that I just love so much. So Chester Cricket finds himself heading to New York, and he gets found by Mario, and he works in a newspaper stand in Times Square. He and his family own this newspaper stand, and Chester Cricket sort of becomes his pet, and they soon find out that Chester Cricket can chirp well-known classical melodies, and he becomes somewhat of a sensation, and happiness ensues from things that happen from this discovery. The family begins showing off what Chester Cricket can do, and it's just really glorious. I have found so much wisdom in children's books, and this is one of those that just has the most amazing wisdom in it. Let me read this part to you. Traffic came to a standstill. The buses, the cars, men and women walking, everything stopped. And what was the strangest of all, no one minded. Just this once, in the very heart of the busiest of cities, everyone was perfectly content not to move and hardly to breathe. And for those few minutes, while the song lasted, Times Square was as still as a meadow at evening, with the sun streaming in on the people there and the wind moving among them as if they were only tall blades of grass. It's just so pretty. I just love it. And here's one of Garth Williams' illustrations. And my copy's a little beat up. I think this one I found in one of the book boxes. I was so happy to find it too. So now we're in the 1970s, and written in 1971 is a book that was, the animated film was just such a huge part of my childhood. And that is Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nim. And I love this book for so many reasons, mostly because it's one of those few books where the mother gets to be the hero of the story. We are following Mrs. Frisby, and she has a problem. Her son is sick, Jeremy, and Jeremy is the crow. Her son, gosh, I forget his name now. Now I need to know that. Timothy! Timothy is sick, and he can't be moved, but the problem is the plow is going to start plowing the area where they overwinter. So they have this winter home, and they usually leave it at a certain point and go to the spring home. And she can't move Timothy, so she needs help. She speaks to the Rats of Nim. So the Rats of Nim, and they also have a backstory. They are rats that were in a laboratory and had scientific experiments done on them to see if their intelligence could be increased, and it sure did work, because these rats are now more intelligent than most humans. And so she goes to the Rats of Nim, and they do help her. I loved this version. It's the 50th anniversary, and I think it's published by Aladdin. It has a sort of faux leathery feel to it. It's super cute. It's illustrated by Zena Bernstein. That's the owl. I don't know if you can see it. I hope you can make that out. So there's Mrs. Frisby right there, and the other rat. I mean, she's not a rat, she's a mouse, but anyway, just such a good book, and my son loved it. He wanted one more chapter, please, Mommy. It got very exciting, especially towards the end. So yeah, highly recommend. So now we get to my favorite decade, the 1980s, and published in 1982 was The BFG by Roald Dahl, illustrated by Quentin Blake, of course. And this was sort of, there was a time period in our house where my son could not get enough BFG. It was on audio, the movie was replaying over and over again. He just wanted me to read him the BFG over and over again. He just loved it. I mean, I'm personally a fan of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. That's my favorite Roald Dahl, but this is his. Sophie's living in an orphanage, and one night she hears something and goes to the window, and it's this huge giant who spots her and sees that she sees him, so he doesn't want to be discovered. He takes her with him to giant country. Now, he's a big friendly giant, but he has a problem because he is being bullied by a group of mean human-eating giants. And so he and Sophie come up with a rather charming plan to take care of these giants. And you can't go wrong with Roald Dahl. Here's one. There's all the mean human-eating giants. And incidentally, the audio version by David Williams, it has so many wonderful things like the burp noises. It's just so funny. Loved this book. Highly recommend. Now we are in the 90s, and Every single book that I've shown you so far are books that I enjoyed just as much as my son. But the one I'm going to show you now was more, I kind of liked it, but he loved it. And that's The Water Horse by Dick King-Smith. This is another one that's really great to read in the springtime because when they find the egg that has the water horse in it, it's in the spring. So they find this egg, they don't know what it is, they put it in some water, and out hatches this Loch Ness monster, or what we've always thought of as the Loch Ness monster. And so what are they going to do with this thing? So they put it in the bathtub and they try to take care of it, and now they're tasked with the challenge of releasing it back into the wild without being discovered. It's a nice, pleasant read for an adult. For children, I think it's quite entertaining for them. And so, highly recommend this. The illustrations by David Parkins. And look how cute that is. It's a little otter. And one more that I'm trying to find. There he is. So yay, now we're in the 2000s, and the book that I want to talk to you about was one that I really wasn't looking forward to reading at all when it was on our list. But then we read it and I just loved it. I thought it was amazing. And that is Masterpiece by Elise Broach and illustrated by Kelly Murphy, published in 2008, I believe. And we follow another very talented insect, this beetle. This one can draw, and he draws beautifully. And the boy whose room he enters, he draws this beautiful drawing, and the boy has to take credit for it because he can't explain it. So eventually a museum curator who believes that this boy can help them catch a art thief. And it's just really surprising at the end, and there's this wonderful relationship between this beetle and the boy. You learn a lot about the artists Albrecht Dürer and Giovanni Bellini, and there's a twist at the end that you don't expect. And it's just really lovely. I really enjoyed this one, and so did my son. So it's another one of those books that we both enjoyed, so a jewel. Here's an illustration from Masterpiece, illustrated by Kelly Murphy. It's so adorable, isn't it? So now we get to the decade of the 2010s, and I don't have the first book in the series, I only have the second one, but I'm just going to cover both of them in one, and that is the Wild Robot series. And I love this series so much. My son loved this series. It's another one of those books that's surprisingly about motherhood. The robot, Roz, is actually a female robot, and, well, actually, I'm not really sure. Maybe it doesn't actually say if she's female or not. One just assumes. I'm not sure. But anyway, there's this ship of robots that have been manufactured for a certain purpose, and it crashes on this island, and one of the robots is fine, and she gets up and walks out of the crash site. Her name is Roz, and she kind of is lonely, but eventually learns to speak to the animals of the island, and she ends up becoming the mother to a gosling. I love it. I'm so excited. There's the third in the series is coming out this September. I think it's called The Wild Robot Protects. The second book is wonderful as well. Roz has been captured and ends up on a farm where there's two orphans, or not, they're not orphans, but they've lost their mother. So she kind of steps in and protects and helps the two children. And so that one is just wonderful. I actually thought the second book, this one, is better than the first, but the first was really good. So I highly recommend this one. Let me just show you some of the illustrations right here. So there's this one. My son went through a crazy snake phase, so whenever we saw snakes and things, we would always get it. And then, oh, look at this one. This is the children. It's just a very wonderful series. I highly recommend this. Okay, so now we are in the final category, which is the 2020s. And I have for you Michael Morpurgo's. Let me do that again. Michael Morpurgo. That is the hardest name to say. Michael Morpurgo's The Puffin Keeper, and it is illustrated by Benji Davis. We follow Alan and his mom, who are on a ship, and they get shipwrecked and saved by a lighthouse keeper. Now this lighthouse keeper and the boy become good friends and end up writing letters to each other throughout the boy's life. I just have to tell you, I don't want to tell you why, but the reveal is in the afterwards. So You have to read the afterword to get the reveal. Don't read the afterword first, read the afterward. And look at this book. I have to show you under the dust jacket, which, by the way, always check under dust jackets because I have found so many cool things under dust jackets. Really cute, beautiful illustrations. I love his artwork. And then I also wanted to quickly just show you, I'm not going to talk about it here, but another one of Michael Morpurgo's books that I just really loved, just have to quickly show it to you, is The Butterfly Lion. It's just a wonderful book. I'll talk about this on a future video, but just a gorgeous book. Anyway, so that brings me to the end of the list. If you have the stamina, I wanted to add a graphic novel real quick, and this is Cody. It follows a young girl who meets a Kodiak bear, but then she has to move away, and the Kodiak bear, tries to find her, actually does find her. And it's just a lovely book. The illustrations are wonderful by Jared Cullum. And I believe he is doing a follow-up graphic novel for this one. Let me find one more. It's very sweet. We really enjoyed it. We've read it a few times now. So that's the end. I hope you've enjoyed all these book recommendations. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe and to like. Let me know what you're reading or if you've read any of these books and what you thought. And yeah, thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.